Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Crosby. I am the Development and Events Coordinator at Habitat Metro Denver. In just a moment, you'll hear from our CEO and Executive Director, Heather Lafferty, as well as our special guests. Throughout the course of this evening's event, we do invite you to submit questions for our guests through chat. We will endeavor to get to as many of those as we possibly can. So to do that, on the bottom of your screen, you should see a black Zoom toolbar. Once you click on the icon called chat, it looks like a little cartoon speech bubble. You'll see a drop-down menu, and from there you can choose where to send your message. Please send all questions to questions at any time during the program. That will be the only monitored chat line, so please only chat to the questions chat. So thank you for using that function and helping us get to as many questions as we possibly can. With that, I will go ahead and introduce Heather Lafferty. Thank you.
Thank you, Crosby. I appreciate you getting us set up this evening. And to all of our guests, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I was just sharing with our panelists, I've been looking forward to this discussion all summer, honestly. And so I am just thrilled to have such a diverse group of people in our audience tonight to hear from local leaders and experts about the history and the future of Northwest Denver, or the North Side, as it is fondly known. And this is an area where Habitat Metro Denver is currently building 28 new homes at ARIA. Now, for those of you who don't know, ARIA is a mixed-use, mixed-income housing community on about 17 acres just across the street from Regis University. Habitat purchased land up there several years ago. We bought about an acre, and we are absolutely thrilled to have the first buildings coming out of the ground. We raised the first walls there back in the spring, and the first buildings are nearing completion. And if you haven't been out there, please come and take a look. It is a beautiful site, truly a beautiful community. And these homes that we are building at ARIA are some of the 200 homes that this year we will build, renovate, or repair. So I am so grateful to our hardworking staff, plus everyone with us tonight who has volunteered or donated to help make this vibrant community possible. Thank you. So now I want to give a thanks to our distinguished guests who will help us understand the historical and local context in this area. It's important when we're building and working with a community to understand both the history as well as the local context. So I am now going to introduce you to our three panelists so that we can jump right into this discussion. And I'm going to start with Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval. Councilwoman Sandoval is a proud, lifelong leader of Northwest Denver. As Councilwoman for District 1, she has been a leader in her passions of land use, development, and zoning. And let me tell you, these passions are deep. Her genuine focus has been integral to addressing issues both large and small and creating a community where both current and future generations will thrive. Thank you for joining us, Councilwoman. And Mary Helen Sandoval, she is with us tonight. She is the former president of Mercy Housing Colorado, and she remains very active in the North Denver community. She is a realtor for the TJC Real Estate Company and volunteers. She has a very lengthy list of volunteer activities, including Colorado High School Charter, MHOS Housing, and the Loretto community. Mary Helen has lived and worked in Northwest Denver most of her adult life, and she has a rich understanding of the history in this area, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from her. Thank you, Mary Helen. And finally, Tim Boers, who is the principal in charge of design for aging at Boulder Associates, and he is also the chair of the Highland United Neighbors Planning and Community Development Committee. I understand he has been doing that as a volunteer for more than 40 years and has been working in the design of healthcare and senior living environments for about that long as well. So thank you, Tim, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us this evening. So let's just dig right in here. Now, I will share most of my questions, and for the audience, I'm going to start with some questions to get our dialogue going, but we will have time at the end, as Crosby shared, so please go ahead and put those questions in the chat. But most of my questions are going to be more about the recent history in terms of the land and use in Northwest Denver. But I do just want to start by taking a moment to acknowledge that this land was originally home to Native peoples, including the Southern Cheyenne, Arapaho, Shoshone, and Ute tribes, who settled here along the Platte River in what we now call Northwest Denver. In the early 20th century, then, immigrant groups, European immigrant groups, including the Italians, Germans, and Irish, began to settle in this area. And then, most recently in the 1920s, Mexican and Latin American communities began to call Northwest Denver their home. So it has been a largely working class area for decades, with a lot of modest single family homes across many neighborhoods. So I just wanted to kind of give that earlier history context, but now I would love to hear from all of our panelists about the changes that you have witnessed and experienced as residents and leaders here in this area. So Mary Helen, would you start us off by sharing your perspective on what Northwest Denver has been and the people who've lived here?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Well, I moved to Northwest Denver in 1970. My husband and I moved and first lived in an apartment. And then in 1972, we purchased a home, and I was reflecting about all the changes in Northwest Denver. We purchased a really beautiful home close to 36th and Vallejo, and that home was $25,000. So that kind of gives you a context of the area and the prices of homes. And we knew we got a good deal at 25,000, but as a matter of fact, I mean, that was the price of homes. I mean, 30,000 was a very, very expensive home at that time. And then in 1981, I became the director of what was called the Highland Neighborhood Housing Service. And that was from Federal to Tejon, and from 38th down to the highway, south to the highway. And the purpose of that organization was to revitalize a declining neighborhood. There were lots of homes that were in disrepair, and homeowners were not able to fix up their homes because of income restraints. And so we had a loan fund, and we were able to lend people money to be able to fix their homes at considerably below market rates. And sometimes I remember one time there was a woman who lived on Zuni. Her husband was in the hospital, in the Veterans Hospital, and all of her money had gone for that. So she said she was going to have to move out of her home because she needed a new roof and new gutters, and it was leaking. And so we were able to provide a 0 interest loan. No, it was 1% interest, sorry. It was 1% interest loan for her And I said, well, what do you think if your payments were about $19.50 a month? And she said, Mary Helen, she said, I could do it. And so she was able to stay in her home. But there were, I mean, that's just one short little story of many people that were able to stay in their homes because we provided those very low interest loans to be able to fix them up. And it was really a delightful neighborhood. About that time, or shortly after, probably, Tim and his wife Leanne moved in on 32nd Avenue. And Tim heard about some of the activities at the Neighborhood Housing Service and got interested in it and said, well, I'd like to participate in a couple of things. And so I said, well, fabulous. And we had a variety of committees. And I asked Tim if he would chair the Planning and Community Development Committee. And he graciously said yes. And he has continued on. He and Leanne still live in the neighborhood. They've raised their kids there, as did I. And he has, just done remarkable work. Tim, maybe you'd like to share some of your thoughts about those early days when you moved in.
Thanks, Mary Helen. The first thing that you grabbed my attention with was the ability to find some city funding to plant trees and restore the streetscape along 32nd Avenue. And so we got to know our neighbors very well, as we had to provide all the labor while the city provided some funding for new trees. And so those trees are mostly still along 32nd, and now they're 40, 50 feet tall and providing lots of shade to what had been kind of a barren street. But in the 10 years between when you arrived in Highland and when I did, the prices had gone up. My house was $58,000 and it was a wreck. But 3 renovations later, it's a nice house, and we love the neighborhood. But we've worked on a lot of things. We turned around a declining neighborhood collectively as the whole neighborhood really came together to do that. And I would say my only regret is we might have been too successful with that. We turned it around and then it became really, really popular. And that brings a whole new set of challenges to us.
I appreciate you acknowledging that, Tim. And I think as we think about displacement and gentrification, that's definitely something that we will want to touch on. But Councilwoman, let me give you a chance to also just talk about, my understanding is you've lived here most of your life up in Northwest Denver. Is that accurate? What have you experienced?
Yeah, I've only lived in the north side. So I grew up in the house where my mom and dad bought off of Vallejo Street. And I grew up going to lots of evening meetings, probably similar to my kids. I remember Tim, he probably thought I was this young kid who was always constantly bothering the executive director in these meetings with my bike, or if I fell or something. But I just remember hearing some of the work that my mom and this committee had done, especially this person who was not able to get a mortgage because of his sexual orientation. And I remember hearing that as a young age, and I didn't know exactly what that meant. I didn't understand that somebody couldn't get a mortgage because they happened to be a different sexual orientation. I didn't understand those implications. But when I was growing up, I went to Bryant Webster Elementary School, which is not far from, it's in the Highland neighborhood. And I graduated from North High School. And when I grew up, I would say the neighborhood was predominantly Latino. I don't think that was particularly true when my mom and Tim moved in. But by the time I had grown up in the late 80s, it was predominantly Latino. And most of my friends, we had simple homes. They were brick homes, simple, just nothing too fancy. And North High School was not a desirable high school. It was actually not doing very well. And all of my sisters, I have two siblings and three older siblings, and we all graduated from North. And I think by the time I graduated in 1997, gang violence had peaked in Northwest Denver, and shootings had happened along Federal. And it was as much work as Tim and my mom had done to transform the neighborhood and bring in different type of amenities such as trees and other important amenities. Gang violence was rampant in my existence. I went to a lot of funerals. I had a lot of friends who passed away in high school. And so I think I had a bit of a different experience in Northwest Denver than maybe other people did, just because of how it was 1993 that was coined the Summer of Violence. And I was a freshman at North High School that summer. And so it changed. I remember some of the things that I remember are there were many more liquor stores. There were probably more laundromats. I think about where if I want to go do laundry, like my larger items, there's not as many laundromats. There's not as many corner stores, little neighborhood serving retail corner stores. But one of the biggest transformations I think I saw and I witnessed when I was younger was across the street on 32nd and Zunai was a beautiful building. It's called the Weir Building. And across the street from there was a junkyard. I remember I would have to cross the street if I wanted to walk across the block there, because they had a nasty mean dog. And everyone hated that junkyard. I mean, it was not well received. It was right there on 32nd and Zunai, across the street from the liquor store that's still there. So it would be the northeast corner. And my mom and neighborhood activists were able to build the first affordable housing units. And I remember being there for the groundbreaking and seeing people's joy of owning a home. And it's called Asbury Row. And then next to it was a little playground. Since then, the playground's no longer there. But I remember spending many hours with my mom at that project site. And I would be able to go across the street, the alley, and play at the playground. And so I think that was one of the most transformative projects that I saw as a young girl, that brought the ability to bring community together on one topic. Everyone wanted that junkyard gone. And the ability to take that land and to build it into affordable housing, deed restricted affordable housing, I think was one of the proud moments. I remember standing there looking at my mom and thinking, oh, this is what change looks like. So it doesn't look like that now. The Asbury Row is still there, but we have $1 million homes in Northwest Denver, which I never thought I would see in my lifetime.
Yeah,
You
no,
know, I want to just add a little bit to that Asbury Row story. That was decided by neighborhood residents. We had a big meeting of the neighborhood and asked people what the most important thing was to make a change in the neighborhood. And it was decided that getting rid of that junk car lot was absolutely critical. So we did, we were able to get rid of it. And we got some funds from the city and some funds from the state housing to be able to build those units, and had really good loans, low interest loans as affordable. What we didn't do at that time and didn't know how to do was to keep them affordable and to put restrictions on the deeds as is happening now, to be able to keep those townhouses affordable. A little side story about those, there was a police officer who put an offer in on one of the homes and had it under contract. And he was working, no, it wasn't a police officer. It was somebody who was a friend of a police officer, and he was working out with this guy. And the guy said, oh no, not on 32nd and Zuni. That's one of the most dangerous corners in Denver. You cannot buy a home there. And so he canceled his contract, and he said, why? Well, I just could not even believe it. So I went and met with the police chief, not the chief, but the commander, and told him what one of his officers had said, that this was one of the most dangerous neighborhoods. And I said, we are working as hard as we can to turn this neighborhood around. And here, one of your officers is, telling him to get out of that and not to buy it. I mean, I was enraged. I didn't say it very calmly when I met with the commander of District 1. And he said, well, I don't blame you one bit. And he said, I will talk with all of my officers and let them know what's going on and what you're doing to make change in the neighborhood. So that's just a little additional story to what you said, Amanda.
Yeah, well, and that, that has a lot to do. There's a lot of history in that, and from the standpoint of, the perception of neighborhoods, and especially neighborhoods that were at one time redlined. And, a lot of Northwest Denver was redlined. And so that perception, I appreciate that story, Mary Helen, as heartbreaking as it is, unfortunately was probably not all that uncommon, was it?
No.
Yeah.
No, because, and as Amanda said, talked about the gang and the gangs and gang activity. And there was a lot of drug dealing right there on that corner. Tim lives just down the street from that, a couple blocks down the street.
I was young and naive in those days.
Well, Tim, I appreciate, and I'm trying to, Asbury, are they row homes? Do I have the right?
Yeah, they are.
Okay. I thought I had the right community. I mean, first of all, Mary Helen, I loved how you talked about the challenge of how do we keep things affordable. And I just have to put in our homes at ARIA, based on what you all did and learned, and the fact that we need to keep homes affordable, will be a part of a community land trust. And so they will be perpetually affordable, which we're really excited about, because we want to make sure that there remains affordable homes in this community,
Exactly.
Not just for a family or a homeowner today, but for generations. So I appreciate that. And then the second piece around row homes, I love that we used to have a lot of that different type of architecture in this area. And that seems to be going, away. Tim, I'd love to hear from you as an architect. What should we be doing to both preserve and allow that type of diverse housing, the building to exist in Northwest Denver?
Yeah, the challenge throughout the city of Denver is that the zoning allows greater density, greater number of units, greater height, everything that encourages redevelopment. And it's designed to have redevelopment occurring. And so to protect existing neighborhoods from the zoning is the real challenge. And the best things that members of our community have done over the years are to get landmark designation of whole portions of the neighborhood. So the Potter Highlands portion of Highland is a landmark district. And so change there comes with more difficulty. You have to get approval from the Landmark Commission to tear something down, and you have to have plans for what you're going to replace it with before you can tear it down. And if it's built before 1943, essentially you cannot tear it down. So, so there's that kind of preservation that can help save things. We've used some overlays to try to tone down the zoning a bit. but what we're able to do and what we're able to convince property owners to do is challenging. And if you're not in a landmark district, there's a lot of pushback on in areas where there's already been some redevelopment. And so, I would have to say honestly, in Highland, we've lost the battle anywhere that's not in a landmark district. There's huge pressure because of the value of the land. And, the city assessor's office tells us how much the land is worth versus how much the house is worth. And you see that having reversed over the last 30 or 40 years to where the land is worth more than the house.
Right.
Many times.
Yeah, and so being able to figure out how do we increase supply in a neighborhood that's a high opportunity neighborhood, which many of, I think a lot of us who live in Northwest Denver believe this is a great place. It's a good place to raise a family, and there's a lot of great history and culture here, and opportunities for some affordable housing. And yet there's not enough of it. So, Amanda, thinking about from a zoning standpoint, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about this. I'd love to get your perspective on, we know that there's 115,000 housing cost burdened households in the city and county of Denver. So we have a supply issue. How do we overcome that while keeping to some of, what we all love about our neighborhoods?
That's a great question. That's not has an easy answer. I think of it as a complicated puzzle. And what can I do in Denver as a city council person and a land use commissioner? So being elected in the last 2 years, one of the things that I've done is looked at where accessory dwelling units are allowed and not allowed. And when we were updating the 2010 zoning code, and just so for reference for those who are viewing, Denver didn't have a zoning code until 1952. So we haven't had zoning for as long as Denver has been established. And then we revised our zoning code in 2010. So we've had 2 versions. And then when we revised it in 2010, the entire city did not allow accessory dwelling units, which are little houses in the back, whether they be on top of a garage or a separate structure. And in the areas that they are allowed, they usually have max footprint. So you have, I think the largest one in Denver you can build is 1,000 square feet. That's on a pretty big zone lot, parcel lot. So the average size is about 800. And so I have rezoned a couple neighborhoods to allow accessory dwelling units. One is Chaffee Park in November 2020. And then just recently, a couple weeks ago, I rezoned the whole entire neighborhood of the Sloan's Lake neighborhood to allow accessory dwelling units. So that's one, to add the gentle density that doesn't change the character of a neighborhood. I don't get complaints at city council in my office about accessory dwelling units. I get complaints about crime. I get complaints about all kinds of different things. It's pretty rare I get a complaint about an accessory dwelling unit. And one other thing that I sit on a task force called Expanding Affordable Housing. And what we're looking at is requiring a policy that no matter that an apartment building has to build affordable units in it. So you can't just max out. So some of the things that Tim was talking about, how the character has changed, the lower part of Highland, when we rezoned, it went from where Pagliacci's is, if anyone knows that, it's a little restaurant, 1-story zoning, to about 5-story zoning. It got infilled, the lower part of Highland, with a lot of apartment buildings. And there was no requirement in the city to build affordable when you're building out apartment buildings, whether you're selling them or you're renting them. And that's not what made Northwest Denver so amazing, is all the socioeconomic diversity, and it made it really eclectic. And so we're pushing to make that a requirement on some of the policies that we're thinking about. So I'm thinking of it as policy, and I'm also thinking about it as a land use commissioner and trying to preserve some of the places that we love. And the last thing I've done is in Harkness Heights. It's a little neighborhood that's bounded by federal Lowell 41st and 44th. We did a conservation overlay, and it's the first time that we did a max amount of that you could build a new home. So it doesn't have historic status like Potter Highland, like Tim mentioned, but you can only build if you demo a home. The max square footage for first and second floor is 3,000 square feet, and everything in the market is all based upon square foot and how big your lot is. And so if you put a max amount of square foot, if you can only in that little neighborhood of 3,300 homes, if you build a home for 3,000 square feet, it's probably not going to sell as much as the houses that are being built, which are about 5,200 square feet on average on a new infill development.
That's so interesting, Councilwoman. I appreciate knowing that. And it'll be interesting to see over time what that means, both
Yes.
for, what will get scraped, what won't, what'll be preserved, and what that affordability will look like. Staying on the topic of zoning for a moment, and I won't put any of you on the spot, so this will be an open question for whoever wants to dive into this. But one of the things that we are seeing happen in cities like Minneapolis and Portland is the elimination of single family exclusive, and that's important, zoning. So the idea that you can only build a single family home on a lot versus, possibly a duplex or something else that fits the context and the character of the neighborhood, but might have more units. I'm curious, Mary Helen, I know you're in real estate and Tim is an architect, but as you think about, the impact of single family zoning, what does that mean and are there things that we should look at in Minneapolis and Portland?
It's an interesting question. And for those of us who live in Highland, we actually have never been a single family neighborhood. Ours has been duplex zoning from the onset of the zoning code back in the 50s. And so there are a lot of duplexes, and most of the new infill, if the lot's big enough, are duplexes. And sometimes we'll see a single family home on a big lot get scraped and there'll be 2 duplexes that show up. So you can increase density that way. It doesn't protect against change, but at least the change creates greater density. And I think a kind of an interesting fact is, as the size of households has gone down over the years, Highland is less dense today than it was in 1950, because there were multi-generational families, bigger families and so forth in each of those single family houses, or in the duplexes and the row houses and so forth.
So I've done some research on Minneapolis. It gets brought up at city council quite often. And one thing that they are noticing is it hasn't changed the market quite yet. And the reason why it hasn't changed the market is from a PBS NewsHour that I watched, and a couple articles I've been reading, and an interview with the mayor, is they needed to marry it with an inclusionary housing ordinance, meaning that when you built them, you still had to have a couple of the units be deed restricted at a certain area, medium income and lower, because if not, they were still being sold at market. So my mom's from Minnesota, so I've been watching this in Minneapolis, and I have a friend of mine whose wife is a partner in an architect firm in Minneapolis, and I've asked them for data from there. And that's one of the things that they are finding, is that if you do get rid of single unit housing, which you can only have about one single family home, is it should be partnered, or it should also have a partner companion ordinance that has an inclusionary, meaning that you would also, if you take down a single family house and you build a 4-plex, one of those still has to be below market rate, because the square footage is not, the idea that the square footage, that it's going to just be smaller square footage, is going to drive down the value. It hasn't produced those outcomes yet.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And in Portland, and I might not have this quite right, but there's like, you can build a duplex, but if you build is affordable, then you can do a quad or a fourplex. And so, you know, there's incentives in that zoning as well, which I think will be really interesting. So thank you. I think this is an interesting time for us to think about that gentle density. And I personally appreciate the focus, Councilwoman, on ADUs. For our audience, Habitat has been building ADUs, accessory dwelling units, in West Denver, in partnership with Denver Housing Authority and the West Denver Renaissance Collaborative. And we know this is a great way to, Tim, to your point, to get to more generational housing, you know, maybe not under the exact same roof, but on the same piece of land, maybe just 2 roofs, but that, especially at a time like this, is so critical. And so I appreciate that. We are starting to get some great questions coming in. And so let me just, before we lose some of these, Mary Helen, this question is for you, from Anne. And her question is, and I appreciate this because we have lost funding when we think of housing, especially at a federal level, you know, starting in the 1970s. And so her question is, you know, where did funding come from back in the 80s to provide loans for home repairs for residents who couldn't afford them? So interesting historical question there. What types of resources were available for housing at a local level?
So we had a variety of sources of funds. We had a loan fund, and the source of that was from the Colorado Division of Housing, and that was really, you know, a fabulous source of funds. Then we also did a partnership with the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, and we were able to get loans from them, you know, and of course they were loans that had a cap on the income to be able to fix up homes. And then the other source of funding that we had was the City Community Development Agency. We got, and they received their block grants from the federal government. And we were able to implement a variety of programs using a Community Development Agency grant money.
That's great.
One program that we did was an exterior rehab program. Was in just one particular part of the neighborhood that was exceptionally, the exteriors were exceptionally run down, and people could get that money. They would put, for every $1 that they put in, they would get $2 of grant money, and for absentee owners, let's see, they had to put in $4 for every $1 that they got. So there was a difference. And what we did with that program that was kind of unique was, in order to participate in the program, they had to come to a community meeting, which was at a neighbor's house. Because what we realized is that what was happening in the neighborhood that was breaking down some of the fabric of the neighborhood was people didn't know one another. And so in order, as I said, in order to participate and be able to get any of those grant funds, they had to come to these community meetings and get to know their neighbors. And then they would, you know, talk about what they were going to do, how they were going to paint their house or whatever. And, you know, somebody else would say, you know, have different ideas about what they were going to do. But it really did build a sense of community in that particular area of North Denver.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's great. There's so many elements that rely or reflect what Habitat does. So I could hear you, I could listen to you talking about this all day long. So resources are really important, and we know that, and our partners at the
Very
state and
important.
the local level. I mean, it's it's an important way to support our neighbors and our workforce and the people who ensure we have healthcare and all of that. So housing is essential there. We do have a couple more questions that I'm gonna lean on for just a moment here. And sticking with the ADU, so from a zoning standpoint, but then also a pricing standpoint, Pete has a question asking about ADU and how it impacts affordability. And would that, does that drive up property values, which, has an impact both on the homeowner as well as the neighborhood. So Amanda, any of your research dig into that?
Yeah, so that was one of the concerns in the Chaffee Park neighborhood. Is it's one of the most stable neighborhoods in Northwest Denver, meaning there's a lot of home ownership there. And we met with the assessor's office. And so the way that a land is assessed is on improvements and zoning. So I'm not changing the underlying zoning to duplex or even higher density zoning. You're just allowing an accessory dwelling unit. So the zoning, the underlying zoning does not change on the assessor when you get assessed on your value. Now, if you do make improvements, it could raise your property taxes. But what the assessor said is that when people build additions, and people do home improvements, it also can raise home value prices. So he didn't feel like that the amount of accessory dwelling units that were going to be built were going to actually drive up the market. He said that he has seen more additions and pop tops drive up market than he thought that would actually the accessory dwelling units, because I was really nervous. That was one of the things that I was hesitant to do, the accessory dwelling unit. And but an interesting concept came from someone who was building accessory dwelling units in East Denver. What he said is that the zone district, because if it's a single unit zoning, you have to live in your main dwelling unit to build an accessory dwelling unit. So you can't just buy it and rent out both. You have to live there in order to build the accessory dwelling unit. And what a couple developers told me is that the zoning for an accessory dwelling unit, they like to go there, and the houses sell better. But what he's interesting is he said, Amanda, if you make all of Northwest Denver have accessory dwelling unit, you're actually like making the market not drive up anymore, because it's going to have zoning everywhere. And so you're creating an equal playing field for the entire neighborhood, which Denver doesn't have. And I had never thought about it that way. I was like, oh, that's an interesting concept. So that's why I've been working neighborhood by neighborhood. But the assessor's office did say that it's all based on improvements. So any type of improvement that you do to your property could actually raise your taxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important. And while we as Habitat are focused on affordable home ownership, we recognize, that creating rental units is really important because we need that stability. And especially for low and moderate income homeowners, being able to improve their property, create rental income, adds to their ability to create generational wealth. And that is what's so important to home ownership. And we just pulled some MLS data, and there are currently, and this is in the 5-county metro areas, this is not just specific to Denver, but there are 288 homes for sale below 300,000. 288 homes total. We need to create more units that are affordable, and because it's tough to afford a $300,000 house, and when there are no options, that's just going to keep raising those prices as well. So I appreciate that perspective, Councilwoman, in terms of what keeps things affordable. Well, I know we've got just a few more moments, and obviously focusing on affordable housing, affordable home ownership is so critical. And so I'd be curious, what if you all were going to wave your magic wand to create more affordable housing in Northwest Denver, looking forward? I know there's things we can't change in the past, but we can learn from them. What would you do? What would be your solutions to ensuring that Northwest Denver remains the vibrant community that it once was, and as Councilwoman said, with a lot of housing choices? So who wants to dive in first?
All right, I'll go and then I'll call on
There
whoever.
you go.
Or Tim's gonna go. I could see him about to
Yep,
talk,
I
so I'll
can
let
see
you
that too.
go ahead, Tim.
Well, we've got one new example of affordable housing in Highland right now. Denver Housing Authority has built a new building, and it came with lots of angst on the part of the neighbors and on the part of those of us who try to react to what forces are acting on us. But as I look at it, now that it's built, it's on a hillside sloping site. So it starts out as a 3-story building. It's kind of 4 stories on the low side. But compared to the 5- and 6-story stuff that has popped up all around it, it actually feels more comfortably sited in the neighborhood, and it is providing true affordable housing to a lot of families. And there are family-sized units in it, 3-bedroom units, things of that sort. So I think that's a model where it's possible, but it takes some real creativity to try to find land that's available to do that. In this case, DHA had owned the property for probably 40, 50 years. And so they took down existing affordable housing and replaced it, but with greater number of units and so forth. That may be one of the better opportunities to try to model things on.
So I agree using sites. I think a lot of our old parking lots, I don't think we need as many parking lots as we have. I think those could be redeveloped, and with inclusionary housing policy, meaning that so many of those properties units would have to be deed restricted. And I don't want, if I had a magic wand, I would not want, sorry, I think a jet's flying over, so sorry if it's loud. I wouldn't want them all to be the same area median income. I would like them to be broken up, similar to what Denver Housing Authority does, go lower, medium, and then market. So you create a really healthy ecosystem of people who are living there. And then another thing is, I think we have to talk about those who are experiencing homelessness. And we have a social impact model in Denver where people are provided a safe place to live. And the model of success is being able to pay rent after a year. And so I think we have to look at those models. And a lot of these old, we have one in Northwest Denver off of I-70 and Federal. It was an old, it's called the Roadway Inn. It's a women's shelter, and it's almost 89% successful, meaning that women who have gone there during COVID have now been able to be moved into some type of affordable permanent housing. So I think looking just at a certain area median income is something that policymakers tend to do. And I would like to look at the whole ecosystem of what's causing affordable housing and how to not just target 80% of people maybe AMI, but the whole entire process. Also creating, one of the things that we did on the units on the site that Tim was talking about is a lot of apartment buildings are 1 and 2 bedrooms. You can't have a family in a 1 and 2 bedroom. You can, everyone just has to share a room. And so being able to see units that are built 3 bedrooms and maybe even sometimes 4. Denver Housing Authority in their Mariposa off of 11th and Mariposa built 4 and 5 units, and they're rented and they're actually being lived in. And I know Habitat, when I was working in Globeville, that you built housing that was 4 bedrooms and 5 bedrooms, and they were rented quick. because people have families and they don't always want to share. So changing the model, and they don't have to be big rooms because families move out. I have a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old, my husband and I. So families change, but being able to create those opportunities for people to have family, and not just these micro apartment units that are 700 square feet that someone lives in for, you know, the average like about a year and a half, and then they're moving on to something else.
Yeah, great points about size and in bedrooms and in having that mix. And we're thrilled that at ARIA we have that. Mary Helen, what would be, I mean, you used to run a large affordable housing organization. What would be your wish?
Well, I think that what you're doing at Habitat with the land trust is really an exciting step. And I would love to see more of that. I agree with what Amanda said about some of the parking lots that we have that are not needed, and that would using those and having dispersed affordable housing throughout the neighborhood, I think is really excellent. And I know that in these times when, as Tim was talking about, the land is more expensive than, the improvements on the land than the house, it makes it more difficult and more challenging to do affordable housing. But I think that, I mean, despite that challenge, I would like to see, if I had a magic wand, I would like to see dispersed affordable housing throughout the area that would not be able to change from being affordable. So it would be long-term affordable housing.
Yeah, I wish I could give you all magic wands. If I had that power, I would give them to you, because you guys have great ideas. And Mary Helen, I just want to share a shout out that came through the chat saying, what a pioneer, Mary Helen. Thank you, not only from a funding standpoint, but keeping community at the forefront. So one of our guests wanted to share that with you. And as we wrap up here, I do just want to share a quick story as a way of saying thank you to our panelists. But we just recently qualified a home buyer for one of our ARIA homes. And she grew up in Northwest Denver, and she remembers when she and her friends just played in the streets, and it was an affordable community. And she is excited to be able to return to the North Side with her two kids. And she acknowledged that nobody that she grew up with could afford to buy a home in the neighborhood, right, that she grew up in. And she'll now have that opportunity at ARIA Homes by Habitat. And it will be a mixed income community with lots of great amenities and beautiful houses. So we're excited to be able to provide that opportunity for her. And I think it does reflect what you all are talking about. The challenge is we need more of it, right? We need so much more of it, and are excited and we'll continue to look forward to partnering with all of you to figure out how to do that. But in the meantime, thank you to our panelists. We are thankful for your time this evening and the work that you have done as champions and continue to do. I also want to say thank you to our guests for joining us. To be able to talk more about this Northwest Denver community. And so much of what we talk about reflects what we need across the Denver area, across the metro area as well. And so thank you for being interested in this and finding ways to help not just Habitat, but our entire community support our neighbors. So with that, let me turn it back to Crosby for some final wrap up. But again, thank you all.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all. We really appreciate everything that you've said. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. And like Heather said, thank you again to all of our guests for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you have any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I am still taking them, and I'll see, gather and see what we can find. In the meantime, we would love to have you pop on over to our website, habitatmetrodenver.org. I'm popping it in the chat right now. We have opportunities to learn more about our ARIA development and other developments, to get involved as a donor, or to learn about volunteering, or get more information on our resource. We also have lots on there about the advocacy that we're doing. Thank you again. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. Take care.